Lesson 27. I can find a common denominator to compare fractions greater than 1. Please open up your problem set books to page 55 and follow along with this video. The first problem asks us to draw a tape diagram to model the comparison of 3 2/3 and 3 5/6. You can see that in white I modeled the 3 2/3. So I broke my tape diagram into thirds separated by the white lines. And since we have 2/3, I filled in 2 of them. Then I demonstrated 5/6 by taking blue and separating our thirds in half again to create sixths. And we have 5/6, so I filled in 5 of the units. You can see that the 5/6 is greater than the 2/3 because the blue goes farther to the right than the white does. So 3 5/6 is greater than 3 2/3. For B, we are comparing 3 2/5 to 3 6/10. You can see that since we have the same whole number, we're going to focus on the fraction. So we have 2/5 and 6/10. So I did the 2/5 first in pink. So you can see I divided my tape diagram into 5 sections. And since we have 2/5, I shaded in 2 of them with pink. Then for 6/10, I took the blue pen and I separated each section once more to create 10 sections, and I shaded in 6 of them. You can see that the blue pen goes farther to the right, or closer to 1, than the red pen, so 6/10 is greater than 2/5. That being said, 3 2/5 is less than 3 6/10. For C, we are comparing 4 3/6 and 4 1/3. You can see that once again our whole number is the same, so we are just going to compare our fractions. I'm going to start with 1/3. I took my pink pen and I separated our fraction bar into thirds. And since we only have 1/3, I just shaded that first section. Then we have 3/6. So we are going to divide each section once more. So now we have 6 sections of blue. And we have 3 out of those 6 shaded. You can see that the blue pen goes farther towards 1, closer to 1 than the pink pen. So we would know that 3/6 is greater than 1/3, or 4 3/6 is greater than 4 1/3. For D, we are comparing 4 5/8 and 19/4. Before we can compare, we need to convert 19/4 into a mixed number. So I pull out 16/4, which is 4, and I'm left with 3/4. So I have 4 3/4. Now I can compare 4 5/8 and 4 3/4. So I draw my tape diagram, and I can see that 3/4 goes closer to the whole number 1 than 5/8. So 4 5/8 is less than 4 3/4. Please skip number 2 and move on to the next page. Now we are going to use our strategy of finding a common denominator to compare fractions. So if we look at 3a, we have 5 3/4 and 5 3/8. Once again, we have the same whole number, so we need to focus on our fractions. So we need to take 3/4 and 3/8 and compare them. Now, we could use our strategy of they have the same numerator, so we know that 3/4 is going to be greater because the pieces will be smaller. But we're going to practice finding a common denominator. So if we have 3/4 and 3/8, our strategy is that we start by listing the factors of each. So we have 4 and 8. So 4 times 1 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 3 is 12, and you continue through until you find the least common multiple. So for 8, we have 8 times 1 is 8. You may notice that we already have a common multiple, the number 8. So 3/8 can actually stay the same. We just need to create an equivalent fraction for 3/4 with the denominator of 8. So we need to think to ourselves, what do we need to do to get our numerator? we have to do whatever we did to the denominator. So since we took 4 times 2 to get 8, we need to also take 3 times 2 to get 6. So now we can compare 6/8 and 3/8. So up here we can change this to 5 and 6/8 compared to 5 and 3/8. And we know that 5 and 6/8 is greater than 5 and 3/8. For this problem, we are comparing 5 and 2/5 and 5 and 8/10. We see that we have the same whole numbers, so we're going to pull out our fractions to get a common denominator. Please pause the video and think about what your common denominator would be. Did you get that the common denominator would be 10? You are correct. So we need to find an equivalent fraction for 2/5 with a denominator of 10. So we know that we take 5 times 2 to get 10, so we have to do the same thing to our numerator. 2 times 2 equals 4. So now we are comparing 5 and 4/10 and 5 and 8/10. So since we have the same denominator, we know that the fraction with the greater numerator is greater. So 5 and 4/10 is less than 5 and 8/10. Now we are comparing 5 and 6/10 and 27/5. Before we can compare these, we first need to convert 27/5 into a mixed number. You can see from my demonstration that I pull out 5 and 2/5. So now I am comparing 5 and 6/10 and 5 and 2/5. Same whole number, so I'm going to look at my fraction. So I'm going to be comparing 6/10 and 2/5. This is the same as the last problem where we know our common denominator is going to be 10. So I need to find an equivalent fraction for 2/5 with a denominator of 10. To get from 5 to 10, we multiply by 2, so we do the same thing to our numerator. 2 times 2 is 4. So now we are comparing 6/10 and 4/10. So we know that 6/10 is greater than 4/10. So 5 and 6/10 is greater than 5 and 2/5. You can also use your benchmark of 1/2 to know that 6/10 is greater than 1/2 and 2/5 is less than 1/2. Compare 5 and 2/3 and 5 and 9/15 by finding a common denominator. If you look at 2/3 and 9/15, we see that our denominators are 3 and 15. You should have seen a little flag go off that says, I know that 3 can go into 15, so 15 is my common denominator. You are right. So 9/15 can stay the same, and we need to convert 2/3 into an equivalent fraction with a denominator of 15. So we take 3 times 5 to get 15, so we do the same thing to the numerator. 2 times 5 equals 10. So now we can compare 5 and 10/15 to 5 and 9/15. So we know that 5 and 10/15 is greater than 5 and 9/15. For the next problem, we're comparing 7/2 and 7/3. You notice that we have the same numerator. When the numerator is the same, the fraction with the smaller denominator is greater. Because if you were to look at this, if you have 7/2, the pieces are going to be bigger than if you had 7/3. So we know that 7/2 is greater than 7/3. 12/3 and 15/4 are being compared. We first need to convert both of these improper fractions into mixed numbers. So we see that we can take 12 divided by 3 and get the whole number of 4. And then when we decompose 15/4, we pull out 12/4, or the whole number 4, and we still have 3/4 left over. So we have 4 and 3/4. So we know that 4 and 3/4 is greater than the whole number 4. Please pause the video now and try the comparison 22/5 and 4 and 2/7 on your own now. Push play when you finish to check your work. You should have noticed that after converting 22/5 to 4 and 2/5, that 2/5 and 2/7 has the same numerator. So we know that 2/5 will be greater than 2/7 because once again the pieces are bigger. Please try the comparison of 21/4 and 5 2/5 on your own now by finding a common denominator. Pause the video and push play to check your work when you are done. You should have converted 21/4 to 5 1/4. Now we're comparing 5 1/4 and 5 2/5. So we need to find a common denominator. You should have noticed that the common denominator for 4 and 5 is 20. So we have to find equivalent fractions for 1/4 and 2/5 with the denominator of 20. So we look at 1/4 first. We know that to get from 4 to 20, we multiply by 5. So we need to do the same thing to our numerator. So 1 times 5 equals 5. So we have 5/20. And then if you look over at 2/5, to get from 5 to 20, we multiply by 4. So we need to do the same thing to our numerator of 2. And 2 times 4 equals 8. So now we are comparing 5 5/20 and 5 8/20. So we can see that 5 1/4 is, I drew the arrow the wrong way, less than 5 2/5. Now we are comparing 29/8 and 11/3. I started by converting 29/8 to 3 5/8. Then I converted 11/3 to 3 2/3. So we have the same whole number, so we're going to pull out our fractions for comparison. We're working with 5/8 and 2/3. So we pull out our fractions to compare. So we are comparing 5/8 and 2/3, which we know are both above the halfway mark. So we can't use 1/2 as a benchmark for comparison. So we need to find a common denominator. So we need to find the least common multiple of 8 and 3, which is 24. Now we need to look at what did we do to 8 to get to 24? We multiplied by 3, so we need to do the same thing to our numerator. And when we take 5 times 3, we get 15. Now we look at what did we do to 3 to get 24? We multiplied by 8. So we did the same thing to our numerator. 2 times 8 is 16. So we know that 16 is greater than 15, so 3 5/8 is less than 3 2/3. Now we are comparing 3 3/4 and 3 4/7. We have the same whole number, so we're going to pull out our fraction for comparisons. We have 3/4 and 4/7. We need to find a common denominator. If we were to list out the multiples of each number, we would have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. If we were to list out the multiples for 7, we would have 7, 14, 28, and here you notice that we have a common multiple, 28. So we need to create equivalent fractions with a denominator of 28. So we look and see, what do we do to 4 to get 28? We multiply by 7. What do we do to 3? We have to do the same thing. So we take 3 times 7 and get 21. Now we go to our next fraction. What do we do to 7 to get 28? We multiply by 4. And I just noticed I skipped 21 down there. We'll add that in. So we have to do the same thing to our numerator. So we do 4 times 4 equals 16. Now we can see that 21 is greater than 16, so 3 3/4 is greater than 3 4/7.